Hi, and welcome back to the first episode of the Entangled Health Podcast in this year, 2026. I hope you had some ease and relaxation over the past few weeks, and that you avoided the flu. I did not avoid the flu and was laid out in a way I've not been in years, decades. It was a wild time. So if you find yourself with the flu, lots of coconut water with vitamin C packets and anything else you can do to make it through because it's a real one. And it seems like the hip new thing that everybody has that nobody wants. And but other than that, I hope you're healthy and well. And yeah, just finding some easing back into a new year, 2026. And I wanted to start off this episode and talk in this episode that kind of like brings together two parts of me that I for a long time kept separately, and kept like my this work in these different areas of my life separate. And now the more I do strategy work, the more I see how and why my doula skill set is basically essential to great strategy work. And so yeah, I often used to talk about it or think about it as like I had this LinkedIn version of the work I do, which is like the storytelling and strategy, and my work with the Center for Story and Strategy. And then the other side of my work is doula. And maybe you know, maybe you don't, but I offer doula care across all of life's thresholds. So, divorce and career change and birth and death and cross country moves and friendship endings and creative projects and book writing and just like anything you can think of, I offer doula support for that. And I actually recently this year, maybe you saw me posting about it, worked with the Aspen Forum for Community Solutions and was a doula for movement workers and like the grief that they carry doing movement work. And with the great understanding that when, those big moments and changes and transitions and energetic asks of movement work are held and supported with doula care, then our workers can stay in the movement longer and more change is possible. And so I've had some other inquiries for different conferences and things to be like the almost like the doula in residence, which I'm really excited about. And as that was happening, I was just thinking like that, you know, the two parts of the work that I do are in it like I can never say it's like inextricable. They are I can't show up to strategy work as a non-doula and I can't show up to doula work as someone who doesn't think about systemically where we are and how that impacts the people who are giving birth or changing their careers or things like that. So today I just want to talk about why your organization, everybody should hire the doula to do strategy work. And, we often, I imagine, think of like the type of work that happens on the strategy side of the house as fundamentally different from what might happen in like a birth room or a room where a death is happening or a room where, there's this great uncertainty. But the reality is that both of them are thresholds, right? And both involve being and bringing something new into the world. And they require somebody, in this case, me, who can hold that space. Excuse me, that's the lingering flu when the path forward isn't clear. And so I think so often I work with organizations and see other organizations who hire consultants who promise certainty. But what we really know is big transformation, big change, big systemic differences don't happen from certainty. They happen from presence, right? They happen from witnessing that uncertainty and sort of shuffling through it and looking at the mess of it all and that middle uncertainty part and finding what change wants to be born from that and like what wants to come of that. But if we ignore the mess and if we ignore the uncertainty of what wants to be born, we actually don't arrive where we want to ride. Because there is no certainty in that until we really sit and witness the mess. So, maybe you're asking, like what do doulas actually do and why does it matter for strategy? So the main thing that I would say doulas do is sit with uncertainty, right? We have this great amount of comfort with uncertainty. There's nothing we can do to control outcomes. We're a companion in the process. And we're trained to trust that something is emerging even when we can't see it, right? Like we don't know, of course I have like many skills of like being able to sort of picture where, if we're talking in a birth setting, where the baby is as they move down. But I like can't see that, right? I just have to kind of take the clues of, the sounds that the person giving birth is making and what I'm learning from their movements and the different things we've done to balance them and progress them and things like that. And so it's that trust that I have as a doula and someone who's been at so many births is that, you know, something is happening and we know that because contractions are happening and a heart rate is happening and all these things, and we just have to be able to trust that, and we have to know that there's this like big beautiful thing that's going to happen, but it's going to take a process where we can't see everything clearly, but we can sit with what we do know and do some like fact finding and investigating about where we are, and um arrive at somebody, some being born. And I think when it comes to strategic planning and story driven strategy, it often fails because it tries to impose, this certainty on an inherently uncertain terrain. There's the communities we work within shift all the time. Their community needs shift, political landscapes, funding landscapes. If 2025 taught us anything, it's that there's these massive changes happening that we have to respond to. And like that's very similar with birth. And so we can't make, these sort of static strategies and these static decisions that strip of the context of what's really going on. We have to make them in the context of what's happening in order for what wants to be born to be born. And while I understand for many people, like uncertainty is such a scary thing and something that they try to avoid and try to, hire someone who promises certainty or something like that, I love it. I love being in uncertainty. It's like where I belong. It's where I do my best work. It's where I find the reality. And like that's where strategy should come from, is that where do we want to be? What wants to be born questions, rather than the like, we've decided on this answer before we've gone through the process. Now let's, just live as if that answer is true, rather than like let the process show us what is true. And another aspect of that is, finding clarity in the void. So there's that liminal space between contractions, between labor patterns, between, and like for on the strategy side, there's between the one organizational identity and the next. And this is where that real work happens, right? It's not this polished deliverable, but um, so much of the good work that happens is in that waiting. And in the case of a story-driven strategy, it's in that listening, right? It's sitting in that void of what might the community say? What do they want us to know? What do they need from us? What are they asking of us? Sitting with that and letting it and listening and deeply listening and saying, who else's voices do we need to know? And like that's where beautiful strategy comes. And it's that circle I always talk about, like when we deeply listen to the communities we're responsible for serving and creating programs for, then, then we create a strat, and of course our staff and programming staff and the people doing the work. When we deeply listen to them and create a strategy from that, it creates a strategy that already has buy-in, and we're already headed towards goals where people have said, yes, that's where we want to go. That's what we want. That's what we need. And when we do that, then, strategy as buy-in. So the implementation is so much more impactful. And as we all know, when we have increased impact, we have increased interest from funders. Suddenly, organizations want to partner with us to make, our programs come to life and to make, to sort of join in on the big impact. And that's a really beautiful thing, but it starts with that listening, and that listening really starts with accepting the void and getting all of this information and all of this um feedback and stories and these beautiful things and creating the clarity out of that. But we can't do it if we're looking for clarity every step of the way. It's that liminal space, it's that uncertainty in birth, it's that uncertainty in creation that really allows us to um move forward with something beautiful. And I think about one client who I'm working with who they had had programs for many years and they had done the same programs for almost decades and they were moving, forward with that. And then something really big happened and it changed their funding structure and it changed how they could operate and things like that. And they had the wisdom after many years of doing the same thing and feeling sort of like they were just like pulling a cart up a hill. They had the wisdom to stop and say, we need a community needs assessment. We need to know what people want, what they're saying, what they're thinking, what their stories are, and so that we can create anew. And so they use this sort of time of great uncertainty and tumult and change to be like, okay, we're actually going to go deeper into this unknown and see what we can learn so we can move forward with it in integrity and knowledge rather than um, trying to just like carry on with business as usual, which can be so tempting, especially when things are changing around us because it's uncomfortable and we want to be able to hold on to anything that feels like certain or right. And so um I just think about all that they would have missed in that, not doing that and not taking that pause, but it takes a lot of bravery. And the thing that I always say is, like some of this sounds like a nice to have, but actually we don't have the time not to listen because none of us have the time or resources right now to spend on things that aren't working, programs that people aren't coming to, health initiatives that nobody's accessing. We just like don't have time or resources for that. We have to get to what do people need and want from us? How can we meet that need? And that takes that sort of being in that uncertainty and finding the clarity out of it. And, one thing that doulas do really well is trust individuals, right? We trust that embodied wisdom, that we trust what the laboring person's body is telling us, what they're communicating, what we can see from their nonverbal cues. And in this way, and stick with me on this metaphor, right? Organizations also have those bodies, their people, their communities, their history, and we need to trust that wisdom, right? That is like intact and beautiful and home of all of the wisdom we need to create thriving communities, thriving programs, thriving services that meet them what they are. And any strategy work that really ignores that organizational body produces like really beautiful reports and strategies that like sit on shelves, right? Because there's no embodiment to them, right? They don't belong to anybody. Whereas when we're creating this strategy from that wisdom and from what people know in the community and the history, we're creating something that has meaning to people and can be enacted. And when it's enacted, they recognize themselves in it and they come along with us. And we make this really beautiful circle that I explained earlier of just like this increased impact, and the increased impact leads to increased collaboration and the ability to grow programs. And it's just this really beautiful thing. But we have to trust that embodied wisdom and that what our communities know and sort of vow to create something that isn't just going to sit on that shelf but is going to be that instead that like living breathing strategy that like gets us somewhere and moves us somewhere and continues to move us as we iterate on it as our community needs change over and over again. And another thing that doulas do really well, right, is that sort of like really deep presence. And it's a difference between being there for someone and being there with someone. And that's where I really see the work of the Center for Story and Strategy is like we are in this with partners, right? We're not, on call for them. We're in the work with them, deep in the work and in their communities and listening deeply and fact finding and story finding and recording and doing all of these things that are like deeply human but that result in really sophisticated really potent strategies that otherwise could have never been found if we didn't have that presence. And so we're really sure and really clear that like I don't come with the answer. I come with questions and an ability to listen and like a deep commitment to sitting in that muck, right? And sitting in all of that information and waiting to find that answer together with my clients. And I just think that's a lot different than, a lot of consulting approaches I've seen where the consulting organization either waits on, the data sets and others from the client or and creates something for them and returns it back. And I think that the really deep, like I, pride myself in and the Center for Story and Strategy and, taking a big load of work off of my clients for sure, but it's this sense of this presence with that is really crucial and that um we can't go without if we're going to do the work that we're all committed to doing. And so I just think it's like so important to like really get that clear in the being with someone and being with an organization and coming in with those questions to say that, we're going to find these answers together. And a lot of that togetherness is with the community that my clients are responsible for serving. And with all of that too, it's important to point out, right, that storytelling is also birth work. Like there's such a parallel architecture of bringing something into being. Both definitely require labor. Storytelling isn't just content creation. It's excavating the truth and bearing witness to that truth and seeing what that truth wants is asking of your organization and how you can share those stories with integrity and how those stories can inform strategy and how that strategy can better serve others. And it's really um, it's a labor. And, another key part of birth work is timing. And, both things can't be rushed. We can't push before there's ready. You can't push before there's that when it comes to storytelling. You can't before there's that trust and that like that labor that's been put in to build that trust. We can't be pushing and we can't be, forcing. And there's just sort of this natural process that has to take place. And another aspect of that is surrender. So often I work with organizations where the story that wants to emerge isn't always the one that was planned. But I say this all the time, like the less tightly we hold storytelling work, the more beautiful it becomes, the more like engaging it becomes, the more possibilities emerge. And so it's sort of that surrender to the process and um the job of I see like the work I do in both doula work and strategy and story work is to, be there for what's actually trying to be born and to allow that process to happen and to not try to like implement, of course we have frameworks and tools and things, but not try to like stick something to a process that wants to be another way. And it's just so I don't know, liberating and interesting to watch, like when we let things unfold as they're meant to and as presence would, and with that surrender incredible things happen that are, often and almost all of the time, right? Like we get to the same outcomes we're looking for, which is increased access to services, increased health outcomes, increased equity. We get there and we meet the organizational goals that are so important to all of us and that we all came into these fields for, but we do it through this process of surrender and letting community lead and lead alongside and deep listening and gathering these stories along the way to share more about that can also be shared to raise awareness and influence decision makers. And so it's this really beautiful ecosystem that really requires that sort of a hands-on process, a stewarded process, but a deep surrender as well. And one thing I love about my co-role as a doula and strategist is that, while I have an immense amount of expertise, I'm not like swooping in with solutions. I'm swooping in with like these tools that work to allow the solutions to emerge, right? And to allow the wisdom to emerge. And um, you know, I often say, and I think sometimes this can be a little bit daunting, but I think is really important to people who are, having, a challenging moment in the birthing process is you are the only person who can bring this baby earthside. And I say that to my strategy clients as well, like your organization is the one who's devoted to listening and creating something from your community and like this is our your work together and you're co-creating with the community and I trust you to do this. You have to have that trust. And so, every much like storytelling, every story that's worth telling marks that crossing from one state to another. And it's similar, to a birthing process of crossing that threshold. And something that I think about a lot and talk about a lot is that we've been conditioned to really see change as scary and to really hold on to what we know to be true and what's worked in the past and things like that. But when you have somebody on your side who is a doula and a strategist and a storyteller and all that brings all those things together, it allows that support, allows all of us and my clients specifically to look deeper and say, what might be possible if we let go of this, and rather than trying to cling to what was or get back to what was. I know that was huge rhetoric during COVID, is getting back to the way things were and getting the world back. But instead, what I really tried to work on with clients during that time, and continued to, as we continue to experience different waves and chapters in the COVID story, is this reality that we're not going back, but that's okay, because if we look at what might be possible going forward, what we've learned, what we've become, who we are going forward, we don't crave the sort of backwards and that sort of clinging. We instead open ourselves up to the uncertainty of birthing something new and crossing from one state to another, and allowing ourselves to sort of let go and do that scary work of, we're not here, we're in that liminal space, right? We're not here yet, and we're not here yet, but we're willing to learn here to arrive here. And it takes that deep learning and that uncertainty between these two spaces to spend time in this middle part to be like, what wants to emerge here? What's possible here? What can we do? Who can we be? How can we serve? And but that only happens if your organization has the right support to feel held, and like, okay, we can, you know, the work that I do is so focused on, holding that, so that those big questions can be asked without that fear and without that, um, you know, like desire to cling to certainty when uncertainty has the answers in it. We just have to be able to feel held and supported to go through that process. And like someone who knows what they're doing can shepherd us. And that's what my role as like the doula of strategy is. And yeah, it's just a matter of like, I live at a threshold, that's what we're constantly doing, and what becomes possible when we're not trying to ignore it, and we're not trying to just like white knuckle through it or grin and bear it, but instead, really arrive at the possibility of it. And, I've talked about so often my identity as an Indigenous woman, and there's a lot of Indigenous wisdom in the work that I do. And so many of our ways of knowing have that relationship and reciprocity and accountability to community built in. And so it's like at the core of what I do, and it's at the core of birth work, and it's also at the core of really good, really deep, really transformational strategy work. And, this foundation really causes me to ask these questions of, who are we accountable to? Whose voices are centered? What will remain when, this strategy is in place and being enacted? And how do we do that responsibly and really see it as a process worth stewarding, not like a box to check to have? And, um, And, I often talk about, the name of this podcast is the Entangled Health Podcast, and the Center for Story and Strategy. We founded the sort of the Entangled Health movement. And the Entangled Health movement has this belief that we do a great disservice when we try to like silo out health into like social health, mental health, physical health, collective health, environmental health. And the reality is that we all know is like our health is not siloed. It's ecological, it's relational, it's systemic. And it brings all these things together into this like beautiful tangle of intersectionality. And I think it's so important that, like if we think about a birth, when a baby is born, they're not born just, they have their own individual health, but their health is really dependent on the person who gave birth to their health, and the home they go home to, if they are going home to a home, and what that structure looks like, and what support looks like in there, and what access to resources and education they'll have. And we can't just say that like we can't split all those things out. They're all really entangled with each other. And strategy is too, right? Like we see so often how strategy just continues to fail and just, take up space on a shelf and not be enacted when we try to silo it out too much and try to not let it be this sort of um, reality of what's informing the other and what's impacting the other. And that's just the way that like the contact and the bumping up against each other happens when we're creating strategy with community wisdom and like story driving that strategy. We really realize how entangled it all is and how much we have to look at in order to create a living, breathing strategy that serves our communities. And so that is, those are a number of the reasons why I just think it's the wisest thing you can do is hire a doula for strategy work. And and I'm a unique case, right? Like, so I got my master's of public health in at Harvard and finished in 2020. And so I understand health systems really well, right? And I also, have been a doula for a number of years. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I've always thought, oh, these are separate things. Like my desire to be a doula came from many things, some of them ancestral, some of them um, just so many. But one of the realities of it is that, is the sense of when I was in public health work, it brought me more to a systems level, which I love. And I love that like systems healing and systems thinking. And at the same time, I missed sort of my pre-MPH work of being on the ground with folks and doing more direct services. And so I was like, oh, I could be a doula on the side, right? And then the more that I practiced doula care and the more I expanded my practice in doula to be like, oh, and it's also about career changes need doulas and books need doulas, and everyone needs doulas for these big life transitions. I started to see that like, oh, actually what I'm doing in my storytelling work is very doula informed and that these things belong together. And and so I now, when I'm working with clients, I bring it forward more because it's like it's the reality is that like it's actually such a potent and important lens that informs the work of the Center for Story and Strategy and sets us apart and allows us to hold, like I've said 1,000 times, that uncertainty, that void space that lets something emerge that really wants to be born and is really, grounded in community and in your organization and that like other types of strategy work just can't quite get to because there's that desire for silos and there's that desire for certainty and like absolutely we're going to get you to a strategy that has like tactics and ways forward, but they're going to be ways forward that we know are laddering up to like what your organization and the community came together to say you want and need. So we know it's like living and breathing and not just like sort of this sterile, we got to this conclusion having never listened to, deeply to the experiences of the people who are going to be enacting and embodying and living in the results of this strategy, right? And so, yeah, and so there's just like this deep reverence that I bring to the strategy process, which is a deep reverence that I bring to any birthing process of, patience and witnessing. And this really, like, I really see it as a sacred and important and process of honor to carry and to be like, we need to, we never, just as we never rush the birth of a child that's going that as long as they're healthy and the person giving birth to them is healthy, we don't rush through this process of trying to like speed up the birth of the strategy that wants to come. And that's not to say it's going to take forever. Like when you do it, when it's done well, when the Center for Story and Strategy and the work I do happens, it can happen pretty rapidly. But it's not rushed. And that's a really clear difference to me is that it's like it's quick, it can be quick and effective and potent, but that doesn't mean that it's like pushed through and rushed and like boxes checked. There's that depth in timing as opposed to that like moving along step by step in timing. And so, yeah, and so I just thought it was like almost time to like come out and just be honest about, that like I think that the smartest thing to do is hire a doula for strategy work because there's just this we just there's something that about the approach to life that's like doula work, started as a lens through which I saw part of the work I do and then became like my lens on life. And I couldn't be as effective and powerful in the work that I do if that wasn't my lens. And so, and then I just, the more I thought about it, I was like, actually, strategy work should just be led by doulas. And so it just sort of brings us back to that, the birthing room and the decision making strategy creation boardrooms aren't that different. There's that uncertainty. There's that need to allow, to witness, to go deeper, to trust. There's so much trust in both processes of trusting our communities, trusting the timing, trusting all of it. And that's really necessary. And that needs, that can be scary, as I said. So you need that doula to sort of hold that process. And So I would love to, to work with your organization on this. And um, as I talk about often, the best sort of door in to work with the Center for Story and Strategy is to book a story lab session, which is where we, step into the lab and spend 2 to 3 hours together, really thinking about, um, what your organization needs, how we might bring forward a story-driven strategy, what's worked in the past, what hasn't, where we want to go, and then I'll create a roadmap and a policy brief based on not so much a policy brief, like a strategy document that will just move you through some recommendations of what we've seen work in the past, what we really think will work for you here, um, and yeah, with that doula lens of seeing how you can build that story-driven strategy and get some really powerful, in the process of building that strategy, get those really powerful stories to share as content and advocacy tools and fundraising tools, and just all of the things you need can come from these really light lift interventions when you know how to weave in storytelling to existing operations and programs. And so I'd love to spend some time with your organization, and I've just seen my clients, after those 3 hours and they get into implementation and realize like, oh wow, this can be this simple and this easy, and engage with their communities in ways where they realize like the community's been waiting for us to ask these questions and engage in these ways. And it's done in a way where it doesn't take years, and it doesn't take building a whole new program, and it doesn't take an exorbitant amount of funding. And another really great place to start is to I have a new suite of 16 trainings that are out, and they're on the website, and we can link them below as well. And those trainings are fantastic, and they really walk you through, the conceptual ideas of story-driven strategy, and then the real tactical, like how to bring them into your organizations, and all the different ways you can implement them at different places of your organization, levels of your organization, and things like that. And one really great add-on that I've recently added is with the trainings, you can also come into like office hours. And so you have the option to have the trainings and twice monthly calls. And if you can't make the calls, you can leave your questions and I can send you a recording. And that can just be a really good way to, have the trainings, learn from the trainings, and then also have that one-on-one and group setting to have your questions answered and see how other people are implementing and organizations are implementing, and have that sort of like lighter touch support, but know that you can come and have your questions answered, um and learn from others in similar settings as well. And then of course there is retainer engagements where we'll do more of that in-depth full partnership, and we'll get you um up and running, and you'll have Monday through Friday access to planning and coordination and all of that. So there's all these levels, but I'm really excited about the the addition of those office hours to the training suite, because it's just such a great way to learn from each other, and then also just know that, like, so often I think we get these trainings and we don't know, we listen, but it's like, well, what about this particular context, and what about the ways in which your organization functions differently than what you maybe heard in the trainings. And then that's a really good place to get those questions answered, so you don't feel like stuck or stalled after you've listened to the trainings. And it allows you to like sort of implement and enact them in real time, rather than we all know the like trap we can get in of listening to trainings and be like, yeah, okay, I'll get to it. But if you have that implementation support along the way, it can just be such a good um way to just get things moving, and get to this place where you have programs that people love and are accessing, and staff who feel really connected to the work that they came to do, and policymakers who understand your impact, and funders who can't wait to fund it because they can see your impact. And it just like it all becomes so possible with these, so in some cases, really small tweaks of just leveraging some of the things you already have in place to gather story and to learn from story and to begin that really beautiful circle that we all talked about at the beginning. So if that resonates, I'd love to hear from you. All my contact information is in the show notes and in the outro. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this sort of exploration of why doulas are the people who should be doing strategy work, because it's all about that uncertainty and that what emerges from the void. And I would love to go on that journey with you and your team and your organization, because I just have seen over and over how powerful it is, and it can't be ignored. And again, as I said, it's not that nice to have, it's that this is where we're going, this is how we get there, and this is how we know we have buy-in. So with that, lovely to be back with you this 2026, and what a year it may be, we shall see. And just sending you rest and ease as we begin the year. I hope you've had some time over the past few weeks to rest, and that you have some more as we start the year. And as always, I am so grateful to have you as a part of this community, and to have you thinking these thoughts alongside me, and exploring these really robust topics of what it looks like when we allow community wisdom and story to drive the work that we do, while also using those stories to engage and to, tell about our impact and make more impact. And as you know, I'm obsessed with it. It's the nerdy little hill that I'll die on. And I just feel so grateful to have a community of people who are also committed to it and thinking about it and exploring it. And I would love to hear from you. And yeah, I will be back in a couple of weeks, and sending you ease and care in the meantime.